Good evening. This is Papa Redwood, and I'd like to thank all you groovy guys and ghouls for tuning in tonight. We have another fun modern tale of madness brought to us by the fantastic Dark Owl Publishing. You can find their books, their wide selection of fantasy fiction, all sorts of eccentric tales on their website, as well as Amazon, and, if you're lucky enough, at the Terror Trader in Chandler, Arizona. Tonight's thrilling tale comes from the Black Hills of South Dakota, from the wonderful mind of Adrian Ludens. Now, Adrian, I apologize if I mispronounced that, but no more stalling. Tonight's story, Behind His Smile, by Adrian Ludens. There are only 3 of us staying in this dilapidated little roadside motel. It's a sad indicator of the shortened attention spans of people today. There's a time when, thanks to the Mothman legend, this motel would be flashing their no vacancy sign for most of the year. The man in number 12 interests me a great deal. Twice now we've passed each other, crunching across the motel's dusty parking lot. He glanced down at me and offered a tentative smile as we passed, and I nodded cordially in return, but that was all. His overall appearance was rather off-putting, but I've decided I would like to visit with the fellow. His presence in this lackluster place interests me. The only other guest is an elderly woman who is staying in room 6. With me staying in room 2, it makes me wonder if the clerk made a conscious decision to keep us as far apart as possible. Could the walls be that thin? Perhaps they are. I've made frequent trips to the soda machine that bakes in the sun on the far side of the motel, and every time I've passed the closed door of number 12, I can hear the tall man speaking. He says things that I can't quite grasp, poses questions I have no answers for. It's like trying to follow a conversation with an astrophysicist who barely has a handle on the English language. I wonder if he's crazy. Well, what if the man in 12 is here for the same reason I am? He might also be marking the anniversary of the first sighting of the Mothman. Plenty of people have heard about the mysterious creature, but precious few seem to be interested this year. I mentioned the man's incessant muttered questions, but I suppose his eccentric appearance is what most people would remember. He's deeply tanned and quite tall, my opposite in these respects. His long, dark hair is combed back, and he wears a glittering green full-length coat that looks to me like what they call a duster. I've never seen him without it. He wears a wide black belt that matches his deep-set eyes. Now that I think about it, when he smiled at me the first time, I thought he rather looked like an aging shock rocker. The man's clothing and demeanor are terrifying and ridiculous in equal parts. The motel is a throwback to the heyday of Route 66 when men still wore hats. The rooms form an L shape. The office squats apart, close to the curb. My room is shabby and exudes a musty odor that I imagine spans back decades. It's the type of place one imagines has seen better days, but even those days weren't much to celebrate. The prices are quite reasonable, however, and the sweaty, morbidly obese man who tends the motel office was quick to volunteer directions to the nearest gentleman's club, which I understood was meant as a friendly gesture. I asked the clerk, who introduced himself as Dewey, about the Mothman, but he only shrugged the rolling hills that were his shoulders. Just moved here about a month ago. Never heard of no Mothman. He seemed sincere, so I didn't bother to correct him. A vacant strip mall molders next to the motel on one side, and a decrepit warehouse leans in from the other. Drive a few miles north of here on Route 62, and you'll encounter the abandoned remnants of the West Virginia Ordnance Works. Travel a mite further, and you'll lose yourself in the McClintock Wildlife Area. I suppose it's not a typical tourist destination, but I'm not a typical tourist, nor, I would wager, is the man in 12. Perhaps we are kindred spirits, pilgrims still searching for the truth about the Mothman. If I could devise a way to accidentally encounter the grinning man, perhaps I could engage him in conversation. If I turned the topic of conversation to the Mothman, we might share our experiences and anecdotes with each other. I've been here over a week and still haven't met a friendly or talkative person besides the corpulent motel clerk. The servers and store clerks pretend not to hear my questions concerning the Mothman. I find their collective silence rather perplexing. Much to my surprise, the statue depicting a rather sensationalized artist's rendition of the Mothman has been removed, perhaps even demolished. Gone are all the souvenirs. The fact is I can find no trace of the legend. Though I know it exists, I wonder at the sudden change. I drive my car around town and the surrounding area, wandering and exploring each day until late into the evenings. The cherished notion that I might miraculously encounter the Mothman is never far from my mind. In fact, as I turned into the motel parking lot after another disappointing and uneventful day, a strange figure froze in the glare of my headlights. My heart leapt into my throat. There it was. My eyes had deceived me. I hit the brakes and stopped only inches short of the tall man from room 12. Despite the close call, he grinned when he recognized me. His green duster sparkled in the illumination and billowed behind him in the breeze like wings. No wonder I'd been fooled. The dark man nodded at me and, still grinning, strode across the lot. My radio erupted with crackling bursts of feedback from several stations, all talk radio programs from the sound of it. I fumbled with the volume knob, but the sound seemed to diminish of their own accord. I glanced up in time to see the tall man push open the door to room 10 and disappear inside the rectangle of darkness. Surprised at his apparent room change, I drove the last few yards in uneasy silence. I wonder if the man in the green duster is here without transportation. I have yet to run into him at any of the diners or convenience stores around town. I've described him to people. I assumed a fellow that eccentric looking was bound to get local tongues wagging, but all I got were blank stares in return. He must not have been satisfied with room 10 either. I could hear him running through the litany of his incessant questions as I passed room 8 this afternoon on my way to the soda machine. I felt half tempted to simply knock on his door and use his room hopping as an excuse to start a conversation, but I chickened out again and kept moving. Headaches arise with each trip to the vending machines, but I can't decide if it's more or less caffeine my body craves. This is strange. The man with the perpetual grin now occupies room 6. An ambulance arrived early this morning, and a pair of sleepy attendants wheeled the old woman out on a collapsible gurney and hoisted her body into the back of the vehicle. I say body because if she were alive, they certainly wouldn't have zipped her into that telltale black bag for the trip. The motel clerk didn't know the cause of her passing, even after I had offered him a $10 bill for his trouble, so I again took him at his word. As I climbed into my car the next morning, I sensed someone watching me, and looked up. The new occupant of room 6 stood in the window, parting the curtains and grinning at me. He acted as if he and I shared some ghoulish secret, and I felt my heart start to race. I blacked out and sped away down Route 62. Today, while hiking in the McClintock wildlife area, I had a chance encounter with a park ranger. The fresh air cleared my head, and I felt great, as I often did during my time away from the motel. I've been wandering along a nature trail, and the ranger marched in my direction from deeper in the brush. We exchanged greetings and mild pleasantries. His name, he said, was Simon. He explained that part of his job included ensuring the deer hunters followed the appropriate laws.
Need a special permit to hunt out here,
Simon said.
Only bucks with an antler span of 14 inches or greater can be killed.
How he pronounced killed somehow put me at ease. Whatever coldness had infected most of the town hadn't affected the park ranger, at least as far as I could tell. I broached the subject of the Mothman.
Wasn't a moth, wasn't a man,
Simon announced. He hitched up his belt in a way that reminded me of Barney Fife.
It was a bird.
I'll be darned, I commented, lapsing into a folksy delivery that matched his. Must have been awful big. I still had my own ideas about the creature.
Oh, it was,
Simon agreed. He leaned in and lowered his voice, though we were alone.
My daddy was a park ranger here in the 60s and 70s. He passed on in 82, but he told me the truth about the Mothman a few days before he died.
I held his gaze and waited for the second-generation park ranger to continue.
The Mothman was just a mutated bird. Looked like a giant sandhill crane. The damn thing had 2 necks and 2 heads. My daddy swore to the fact on his deathbed. Said the thing had a wingspan of 13 feet. He thinks the red foreheads accounted for the glowing red eyes folks claim they saw.
How did a giant 2-headed crane disappear like it did? I had started to think there might be something to Simon's story.
Just a few days after some folks saw it roosting in the Silver Bridge, it flew into a power line, blew out the electricity in Point Pleasant, and burnt itself into a crispy critter. Animal control called in park service to have a look-see. What was left of the bird stunk to high heaven and was barely recognizable. The feathers had melted together like wax. My father said they'd kept the bird spread out on the concrete floor of one of the old ordnance buildings at the TNT factory just for a day before it decomposed into ash.
He shook his head as if to clear it.
Happened so fast that no one ever got a picture of it. But it was a bird. I'd swear on my daddy's grave.
I'm sure that won't be necessary, I said. Nice chatting with you. And we shook hands and parted. I arrived back at the motel to discover the grinning mystery man had turned the corner and now occupied room 4. Not that this should have surprised me. I would have been more astonished had he not moved. I've given up on understanding his eccentric actions. Now I simply accept them. Given the grand scheme of things, switching rooms at a seedy motel isn't unheard of. Maybe he's just bored, or he could be trying to find a cleaner room. I haven't seen a maid or housekeeper since I checked in. Still, his manner is decidedly strange. Take his odd clothing, for instance, or the uneasy stream of questions I hear every time I pass his room. What would a face-to-face conversation with the grinning man entail? I feel hungover, though I didn't do any drinking last night. This morning I awoke face down on the worn and musty fibers that pass as carpet here and staggered to the bathroom sink to splash my face. The noise from room 4 had me gritting my teeth and wrapping the lumpy pillow around my ears. When I did manage to drift away, my sleep was plagued with nightmares. The voice that sounded like it belonged to a chain-smoking caveman filtered through an old drive-in movie speaker. The sound had scrambled my brain like a relentless fever dream.
They're all dead. I lost them. Prophecies, where is you?
If the sound had gotten any louder, I thought the grimy mirror in the bathroom would shatter. That or my eardrums would burst. The motel room door had burst open, and a sparkling green figure towered in the doorway. The mysterious man's dark eyes dragged around the room. Never in my life have I seen such a haunted, ghastly face.
Is you here?
He cried out as he raked his long fingers through inky black hair. I realized 2 things in quick succession. First, that the man's lips did not move as he spoke. Then I realized I wasn't asleep. I've stayed in bed all day today. I'm not by nature a hypochondriac, but right now, I believe something must be wrong with me. Perhaps lack of sleep makes me paranoid. Dewey somehow squeezed through his office door and waddled across the parking lot to check on me. Sweat droplets jettisoned off my shaking body and pattered onto the carpet as I stood leaning against the door frame, listening to what he had to say. He wanted me to seek medical attention. I told him that I simply had a bug and would be right again in no time. I felt guilty for lying. He probably feared having a second guest die at his motel in less than a week. I, meanwhile, feared leaving before I could unravel the mystery of the motel's only other occupant. The rest of the morning, the grinning man in the sparkling green duster subjected me to a barrage of questions that my mind could not grasp. My nose bleeds intermittently, and my head hurts so badly a migraine would be an improvement. The man has introduced himself to me several hundred times over. His name is Indrid Cold. Around noon I gave up trying to rest and summoned all my strength. I hoisted myself out of bed. Indrid Cold's voice reverberated in my head as I staggered across the gravel to the motel office. Dewey looked up in surprise and reached for his old wall-mounted phone. I held up a hand. You can call an ambulance after you answer a couple of questions for me. I paused to catch my breath. Indrid wasn't as audible here. The hotel clerk nodded. You hear that television blasting all the time?
No, sir.
Hear anyone yelling or talking? The clerk shook his head. Dewey, did you ever serve in the military? Were you ever injured in combat? The obese man just looked at me as if I were crazy. I'm wondering if you have a metal plate in your head. Dewey's eyes popped open in a mix of delight and dismay, like I just offered him a box of chocolate-covered cockroaches.
I was in a bad car wreck 2 years ago,
he said. Dewey wrapped his knuckles in the back of his skull and produced a flat yet metallic tone. I nodded. Second question. What do you know about the man in room 4? The clerk stared at me blankly.
Room 4 is vacant.
I shook my head. Mr. Cole is in there now. He occupied room 12 when I first checked in, but he's been making his way. Dewey furrowed his brows.
You're the motel's only guest.
I've seen him on several occasions. I hear him rambling on like a lunatic every day. I leaned against the counter. He's been changing rooms and getting closer to mine. The clerk threw up his chubby hands.
You're crazy, man. You probably got some hallucinations from your fever or something.
I spun around and tottered out of the office. My walk back to my room felt like climbing a mountain in the face of a storm, but I pushed on despite the pain. I needed closure. I know Indrid Cole does not intend harm. I feel his sorrow and his confusion. I believe he may have gone mad. Cole is a stranger in this world. I believe he lost something of great sentimental value a long time ago. I visualize a beloved and cherished pet scampering away from a station wagon during a family vacation in a remote wilderness. I believe something similar happened here all those years ago. The mood of the townies makes more sense to me now. As Indrid Cold rambles about, he inundates minds with endless headache-inducing questions. The locals, some consciously, others perhaps unconsciously, have developed a Pavlovian response to him. By denying the Mothman's existence and shutting it out of their thoughts, I bet that Cold tends to leave them alone. Yet I think about the Mothman often. It's possible the old woman at 6 died of a brain hemorrhage when Cold got too close for too long. I blame myself. My interest in the Mothman somehow drew Cold to me, and she paid the ultimate price as a result. Why he chose to approach me room by room down the length of this dilapidated motel, I cannot explain. Moreover, does he realize the damage he is capable of when he tries to communicate? If Cold sees me as a kindred spirit and has the urge to confide in me, I will not deny him. A frown of anguish hides behind his perpetual smile, and I believe I understand why. I try to remember the details Simon, the park ranger, shared with me. Indrid Cold will want to know them. Perhaps he'll finally find some measure of peace. I stand at the door of room 2. My room. My brain feels like it wants to boil out of every orifice in my head. During the brief time that I was gone, Indrid Cold has moved in. I am his ultimate goal. I steel myself and turn the knob. When the door swings open, I hope I will be able to summon enough strength to return his trademark grin. Huh. You know, one of the theories I've heard about the Mothman is that he's a massive owl, though this is the first time I've heard anybody say that he's a bird with 2 heads. Very, very strange to think about all the different creatures that are crawling around in the darkness out of sight, but not out of mind. I just love cryptids. All the stories surrounding them, all the unexplainable details that come along with their quote-unquote existence. Thank you all for tuning in, and I hope you've enjoyed Adrian Ludens, Behind His Smile. You can find Adrian's new book, The Tension of a Coming Storm, in the link below. And once again, thank you to both Adrian and Dark Owl Publishing. And thank you, dear listeners. Enjoy some R&R.